The atheist will have you believe that it is the religious person, that they are crazy, that they have their entire worldview based in myths and legends, no evidence.
Harsh but fair.
They'll even use terms like, I don't believe in your sky daddy, which is kind of weird.
Unfortunate nickname, but apropos.
That is the view of the atheist, that the religious person is the one that lacks any logic or evidence, and that they are totally sound in their rejection of the idea of a God.
Don't you have anything remotely substantial? Do you have any hard data?
Well, nothing that you would call rock hard.
Actually, it's pretty limp, sir.
Welcome back, everyone, to Bridge the Divide, where we examine irrational beliefs, the irrational behaviors that often follow, and how with education, rationality, and reason we can bridge the societal divides that they create. Today, we're taking a look at a video from Theist content creator Ash Mez. But before we begin, there's a couple of things that you should probably know about Ash. Firstly, though he does acknowledge being raised as a believer in a Jewish household, he has taken to defending Christianity, predominantly against rabbinic scholarship. However, in regards to how he defines himself in the scope of his own faith, he so far has played those cards pretty close to the vest. Given his content, the best that I can conclude is that on the surface he presents as a deeply conservative, non-denominational Christian. But beneath that, he seems to ideologically fall more in line with sedevacantism or sedeprivationism, which are movements within traditional Catholicism that openly reject papal authority based on claims of heresy, though Ash himself really tends to hedge his bets and doesn't articulate his position to such an extreme degree. Secondly, he also fancies himself a sort of metal blues style musician, and so far he's managed to release a number of self-produced singles with platinum genius titles such as If Kamala Harris is Elected, Squint Like Joe, Electric Joe, Ramblin' About Trans Folk, The Big Brass Balls of Donald J. Trump, and Shit Blues, a slow blues-styled song about, I kid you not, crapping his pants.
Oh, I shit my pants, baby!
Hey, if I had to listen to it, so do you. Now, in this particular video, Ash claims not only that atheism is a lie, but also that atheists are super religious. So let's dive in and see exactly what this Timu DJ Khaled has to bring to the table.
Is atheism truly a mere rejection of the idea of God?
While I very much wish this question had a straightforward answer, due to the polysemous nature of words, it simply doesn't. Atheism can be understood by a number of different definitions that are usually context dependent. And from there, we could easily get lost in semantic argumentations about etymological use, colloquial use, strong atheism, weak atheism, and even igtheism, which is a direction I think we should avoid because it won't serve our purposes here. Another sticking point here, Ash, is your use of the term rejection. Because the term rejection has such a broad contextual definition, some apologists, in order to keep with what is said in the book of Romans, will utilize that term in order to imply that the atheist is an individual who is willfully refusing to believe the God proposition, regardless if they have justification or not. But this is problematic because beliefs are not things that one actively chooses to hold as being true. They are propositions that for whatever reason one is convinced of the truth of. If you're going to invoke the term rejects or rejection, it's important to note the context, that the atheist is an individual who is not convinced of the truth of the God proposition, and as a result has no choice but to reject the idea that that proposition is true. The act of rejection here is not willful, it's resultant. That said, for the sake of this conversation, I will give you the definition of atheism that I hold to. Atheism, which specifically pertains to a positive personal belief claim and not a positive claim about external reality, refers to a person who does not hold that the God proposition is true, because thus far they remain unconvinced by any of the evidence or argumentation presented to support the proposition, and therefore do not hold the belief in their worldview that such an entity or entities exists.
Is it simply disbelief in God?
Depending on the context, it could be.
Or is it some other ideology, usually disguised as a disbelief in God, or disguised as a more rational and free-thinking way of living?
Yeah, no.
I can tell you it's definitely not any of that, despite how much I know it serves the theist narrative to imply that atheism logically entails or is logically entailed by various philosophical positions that the theist rejects out of hand because of their pre-existing God belief. Atheism refers to a position that is concerned with one single proposition: the existence of a god or gods, nothing more.
Now, today I want to challenge the notion that atheism is in fact as free-thinking as atheists would like you to believe that they are.
Given what I just said about the one proposition, you're going to find that undertaking a mite difficult. But that's only if your intent is to remain intellectually honest about what atheism is and what it entails.
And prove that in fact, atheism never removes religion, it simply replaces it.
I seem to recall Jordan Peterson pulling this very same stunt on one of his Jubilee opponents.
Pew Research studies suggest that atheists and agnostics actually know more about religion and about religious stories, the foundational principles, than believers.
That's because they're more religious than they think they are.
Let's go back to the title of your video. Atheism is a lie, and they're all super religious. Now, there are two claims there. The first being that atheism is a lie, which implies that atheists do in fact believe in the existence of a god or gods. And the second is that atheists are all super religious. A claim which, of course, is going to depend rather heavily on how you're specifically defining religion. But putting all that aside for a moment, you just contradicted the title of your own video by claiming that atheism is just replacing the theistic religion with either itself or some other religion that it grounds. A claim, by the way, that could be interpreted as you thinking that atheism is a religion of some sort. But you seem to have forgotten, or you just don't know, that religions themselves are not bound by the requirement of believing in a god or gods. Buddhism, Jainism, and Taoism are all examples of non-theistic religions. Religions that are defined by their specific moral codes, myths, rituals, worship practices, and internal structures. However, none of those things are logically entailed by being an atheist. So if your goal here, Ash, is to somehow show how atheism itself is a religion or somehow leads to other religions, as opposed to, say, actually addressing the whole justification for not believing in a god proposition part, then I don't know what you really hope to accomplish here apart from confirming that the position of atheism, despite what some individuals may or may not hold to, or how they do or don't behave in addition to it, is one that's rationally justified, which would make anything you're about to present here a total straw man.
Now, let's start with something really fundamental. It seems to be that human beings are hardwired to be religious creatures.
Yeah, that's completely false. But believe me, I completely understand that in order to give your prior claims any credence, you have to establish a false foundation to build from. Now, as much as I personally don't like the loaded implications of the term, if humans are hardwired for anything, it's pattern seeking as a mechanism for survival. One thing members of our species have long held in common is a deep-seated anxiety and fear when it comes to the unknown. Because when it comes to the continued survival of our species, the greatest risk to that is often the thing that we have zero knowledge about that takes us by surprise. Deriving information about the unknown not only reduces the amount that it controls us, but it also gives us a modicum of control over that which we discover through our understanding of it. The problem is that this ancient learned behavior does not simply stop at exploring new lands, seeking out new resources, scientific advancements, or even developing new ways of killing one another. It also goes to emotional and philosophical quandaries. Humans are not hardwired for religion, we're hardwired to find answers. But yet another persistent problem that our species faces is that we more often put the assuagement of our fears ahead of that which is actually true. Because as a species, beautiful lies are simply more psychologically attractive to us than harsh truths. So no, Ash, being prone to religiosity as a result of our evolution does not mean that humans are innately religious.
Okay? Through thousands of years of human history, we can see that atheism, or not believing in God, is a fairly new idea, relatively.
It actually isn't. Jainism, which is non-theistic, is actually one of the oldest surviving religions on the planet, older than even Hinduism by at least several centuries. There's also Buddhism, which is also non-theistic and far older than Christianity. And I have to say, it's a little weird that you didn't know that, given that you just used the Buddha as a pop-up image a few moments ago.
Okay, so it seems that human beings are hardwired to believe in God.
Nope, just debunk that for you.
Now you might say, just because that's the way that it's been done, or that's the way that it's been thought of till now, doesn't mean that it's the right way for things to be or the right way for you to think about it.
That's actually correct. Just because ancient people believed a thing to be true does not mean that what they believed was actually true. It is logically possible that the reason religious beliefs exist is because of ancient ignorant thinking, and simply by virtue of their social utility, they still exist today because they've been passed down through the generations.
However, it does seem, and I'm going to get into this, that it is hardwired and that you cannot be truly irreligious, that you cannot be truly an atheist.
So first, this is really going to depend upon how exactly you're defining religion. And second, for people to not possibly be atheistic, you would have to demonstrate that people identifying as atheists actually do believe in the existence of a god or gods, which of course would mean a demonstration of how you have special access to their minds, because you simply claiming that atheism is false because you happen to be defining atheists as being religious would be nothing more than a straw man. And third, your use of that blurry black and white image of Sam Harris as a pop-up, as if he's some kind of singular shining reference for all of atheists, just to drive a point, is as cringe as your lyrics.
So, when an atheist rejects the idea of a god, whether that is a biblical style Abrahamic god or a more abstract Eastern idea of God, the rejection of God does not simply end there. I don't believe in God. That doesn't end there.
It actually does, because that's what atheism is. It's only concerned with that one single proposition. Anything else would be the concern of some other philosophical or scientific position and would have to be addressed on those merits.
It is almost always replaced by some kind of other ideology.
Even if that statement were true, which it most certainly is not, if the thing replacing the god is not itself another god, because the atheist doesn't believe in the existence of such entities, then it's still an atheistic position.
And you see this with religion being replaced with Marxism or communism.
You didn't see that coming?
I thought you were talking about religions here, Ash. Marxism and communism are sociopolitical and economic philosophies, not religions. And they are not inherently non-theistic, and neither requires their adherents to be atheists. One can be a theist and hold to either Marxism or communism. They are not mutually exclusive concepts. This is literally a category error.
These are state worship religions. They have, structures like a religious structure, and they do believe in an objective truth, depending on which ideology it is, that would take the place of God.
So not only are you strawmanning atheism, but you're also completely misrepresenting what communism and Marxism are through the commission of a fallacy of composition. Something tells me that you should probably start doing some actual research into these subjects, instead of just parroting this ignorant 1950s era evangelical propaganda.
So being an atheist in those senses does not seem to replace does not seem to reject God, it seems to replace God.
Yeah, that's just patently false. Marx and Lenin both had personal issues with organized religion in the Russian Empire because they had come to see the immensely powerful Russian Orthodox Church as a corrupt and power-hungry organization that sought more to control the populace for its own ends than providing spiritual guidance. But their personal views on religion were neither the basis for nor were they a prerequisite for their socio-economic and political philosophies. Your claim that the goal of either men was to replace the Christian God with some other god for the people to worship is long debunked propaganda. What Marx sought was an empowering of the proletariat, or the working class, and part of empowering them was ending their exploitation at the hands of the bourgeoisie, those who controlled the means of production. Lenin, by extension, championed the rights of oppressed peoples and what he saw as the people's right to self-determination, which included the right of the people to believe what they felt was true instead of believing what was being pressed upon them by the powers that be. And it was in that endeavor that he began to view the Russian Orthodox Church is just another force for social oppression. In fact, Ash, if you had actually learned the history behind these subjects, you'd have known that claiming Lenin and Marx simply wanted to replace the Christian God with some other established figure of worship would be a claim that is completely contradictory to either of these men's established and well-understood ideologies.
So those people are religious, and you can see this with things like climate activism. They have dogma, doctrine, there are heresies, there are sins, you can be excommunicated. It functions like a religious system in every single way.
Setting aside how completely idiotic that comparison is, and the fact that I know you stole that rhetoric from that intellectually dishonest shit-stirrer Michael Knowles over at the Daily Wire.
And so the environmentalists have the original sin of pollution, and they have the sacrament of, they sell indulgences in the form of those carbon tax credits, don't they?
You still haven't addressed the only thing that is actually relevant to the title of your video, the justification for the position of not believing the God proposition to be true. Until you do that, until you actually address the position of atheism, everything you've said so far will remain a completely irrelevant and extremely stupid straw man.
Now, you might be thinking, well, I'm a rational atheist.
Well, I like to think so.
I don't get into that kind of nonsense. I simply live in a rational way based in science. I only take what is rational. I don't get involved in silliness, and I don't believe in God, and I don't have some kind of religious system replacing it.
That's pretty much a descriptor of my life. The question is, are you able to either demonstrate that I'm lying or show some logical contradiction entailed by my worldview? Because if not, then you would have to concede that such a position is logically possible.
Hey everyone, Editing JL here. In Ash's video, there was a small detail that I initially overlooked, but during the cutting process, and thanks to my never-ending curiosity, I actually discovered it is a really important point. So get ready, because we're about to get dense. Right here in the video, when Ash is talking about how atheists claim that they don't believe in a god and they don't have any other religious systems replacing it, he utilizes an image of this guy as a pop-up to reinforce his point. As it turns out, what I initially thought was just some old-timey stock photo was much, much more than that. The image you see Ash using is actually an image of Saul Alinsky, who was an American community activist and political theorist. Now, Alinsky garnered national recognition for his work with the Chicago-based Industrial Areas Foundation in helping low-income communities organize and press reform demands on politicians, banks, business leaders, and landlords. In Alinsky's book, Rules for Radicals, a Pragmatic Primer, Alinsky championed both shrewd confrontation and compromise in community organizing as being necessary for social justice. Knowing this now, I have a better understanding of why exactly Ash chose to use Alinsky's photo in his video. You see, back in the 90s, fueled by politically right commentators, Alinsky's reputation was taken as a tactical inspiration by the Republican Tea Party movement against what they then framed as the source of a radical democratic political agenda. In short, the right interpreted Alinsky's community activism and fight for social reform as a beacon for radical socialism, which the right, through a composition fallacy, always associates with things like communism and Marxism. And then they use that interpretation to attack Democrats such as Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. What Ash apparently didn't know, or he deliberately left out, was that Alinsky was of Lithuanian Jewish descent, a group of which over 90% lost their lives during the Holocaust. And by Alinsky's own words, he was a devout believer until he was around 12 years old, and while he acknowledged some rabbinical lessons had a profound impact on his life, he simply had no interest in becoming a rabbi, and as an adult, while he considered himself to be agnostic, when asked about his beliefs, he would always just say that he was Jewish. And eventually, Alinsky found his personal calling in social activism, particularly in the fight against the idea of eugenics, while studying under sociology legends Ernest Burgess and Robert E. Park at the University of Chicago. So Ash's entire reasoning behind using the image of Alinsky here is to reinforce his point that atheism simply replaces God with some other religion, something that he has concluded through falsely equating socialism with communism, and misrepresenting communism as itself being a religion through the use of Lenin and Marx's atheism via a composition fallacy. But the most important takeaway here is that Alinsky never considered himself to be an atheist. So Ash, using his image here, only serves to perfectly demonstrate either his intellectual dishonesty or his complete ignorance of everything he's talking about.
Well, the problem with claiming that is that
the logical possibility of it destroys your entire position?
Well, when we're talking about Western atheists, or people who are atheists who live in the Western world,
I'm not really sure why you're trying to separate out this idea of Western from Eastern atheism. Both concepts have no belief in the existence of a god or gods. It's a distinction without a difference.
What a lot of those people, and you might be one of them, and I want you to think about this for a moment, what a lot of those people do is that they either fail to recognize or refuse to admit that their rationality and liberalism
Ring
the bell!
There's that dog whistle that I fully expected someone of your political leanings to randomly toss in there. You do know that liberalism is a political and moral philosophy, right? That it's based on the rights of the individual, liberty, consent of the governed, political equality, the right to private property, and equality before the law, right? Oh, and as a brief side note, it has nothing to do with atheism. I'm starting to think that you suddenly realize that you trapped yourself in a position that you can't defend, and that's why you suddenly dropped the term liberalism out of nowhere to act as a distraction.
Exists within the frameworks created in Western society of a Judeo-Christian worldview.
And that was just complete word salad. Next, you're probably going to try and sell me on the Christo-fascist propaganda that the United States was founded as a Christian nation.
That the Western society that this rationalism exists in, those moral concepts being embedded in the society evolved through Judeo-Christian society in the West.
But you seem to be forgetting that the origins of these ancient concepts aren't in Christianity or Judaism. They've just been filtered down through time, through societies and cultures since the concepts were first articulated in the Mesopotamian code of Ur-Nammu over 4,000 years ago.
And case in point, when you look at atheists outside of that worldview in the West, you tend to get to things like Marxism, like communism. You get state worship, you get figures like Stalin and Mao, you get things like fascism, although of course fascism can exist in a religious context as well. My point is that they are not different from each other in their structure and the way that they behave.
But that doesn't logically entail that they're the same thing in all instances, which makes your entire conclusion here a fallacy of composition, which in turn undermines the entire point that you're trying to sell to your audience.
They are religious systems.
Gotta lie to evangelize.
Which is why sometimes they can overlap.
And see, right there in your own words, you tacitly admit that they are not always the same thing, which completely undermines your entire presentation here. Now, normally I'd say you should have scripted this stuff out in advance, but the fact that you keep checking to the left of your camera tells me that you did script this out, which means all this nonsense is not a matter of you simply going off the cuff and losing your train of thought. You really are just that ignorant. And even worse, you think your audience is more ignorant than you are.
Now, the other thing is,
the only other thing to address is your God claim. It's the only claim that is pertinent to the discussion of atheism.
That when you reject any kind of spiritual ideas, God or spirituality,
I do it because I'm not convinced such things exist, and because in my worldview I work bottom up from the evidence instead of top down from a presupposition, which means I don't presuppose the existence of things that I can't demonstrate any access to just to validate my personal feelings.
It can only go on for a certain while.
I just turned 45 this month, so I've been an atheist for almost a quarter of a century. And until someone is able to demonstrate that a God exists independently of mind and context without begging the question, that position is in no danger of ever changing.
You can only have that going on for a certain amount of time. And we do see that as well.
This sounds again like it's about to be another fallacy of composition.
For example, characters like C.S. Lewis, who was a devout atheist, a rabid atheist in his own kind of way of discussing it. He eventually found his way back to religion.
And all of Lewis's reasonings for his embracing of Christianity, such as his inability to derive meaning for himself and his lack of personal satisfaction with the idea that the material world was all there was, were nothing more than irrational appeals to emotion. That the embracing of Christianity satisfied him on some emotional level is not evidence that Christianity itself is true. It's only evidence that sometimes religious ideologies provide a personal utility to those who are emotionally desperate and vulnerable, which is precisely the reason that religious outreach groups that trade in the psychological manipulation of material support for ideological conversion exist.
And then you have recently characters like Richard Dawkins.
You invoked Sam Harris earlier, so it's no surprise that you're bringing up Dawkins. I just don't really understand why. Firstly, he's still a transphobic asshole, but secondly, he's still an atheist.
I'm a cultural Christian.
Yeah, Dawkins freely admits that he recognizes and respects the social utility in the structures of Christianity, even though he still doesn't believe in its fundamental tenets, which pretty much just tells us that he both recognizes and respects the social utility of authoritarian control structures, which actually makes a kind of sense given his recently revealed bigotry.
The society of the West is built on Christianity.
It's not. This is a secular nation and was founded as such. I suggest you familiarize yourself with the establishment enforcement and free exercise clauses in the First Amendment to the Constitution.
I would hate to see that be destroyed.
Yeah, he digs on the authoritarian controls contained within Christianity. And he does so because if they were truly in power, then he wouldn't have to deal with many of the things in society that he personally doesn't like. But just because his hate seems to align on a number of points with the hate exhibited by Christians doesn't make him religious.
Because what he is realizing or starting to admit is that the moral frameworks adopted by rational atheists would not exist without Judeo-Christian values built and developed throughout Western society.
I can't believe you can lie like that.
Everything in the field of philosophy that you mentioned here pretty much has its roots in ancient Greece. Christianity and Judaism had nothing to do with them.
On the flip side, and again, this would be a topic of debate here, but I'm just going to give one example, the idea of somebody like Nietzsche.
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
Who said, God is dead, we have killed him, and was afraid of the nihilism that would come. He proposed ideas as to how to go about dealing with that, and yet his ideas couldn't save him from insanity.
Again, this is a fallacy of composition. And by the way, it wasn't Nietzsche's philosophy that drove him insane before his death. That would be the army of spirochetes that were eating into his brain.
Now you might say that there's all kinds of other reasons why he went insane. Maybe he was insane to begin with.
While some may argue that it was either a stroke or a brain tumor, it was most likely tertiary syphilis. You not glomming onto that specific detail tells me just how little you actually researched this.
But you do see the end result of the rational thinker who has no way to find meaning in life.
No, you see the end result of barebacking sex workers in the 19th century.
That is a dangerous game, friendo.
There will always be some kind of way of finding it through the structures of religion that are embedded in society already, or through religion itself.
Depends on the person.
There is nobody who finds any kind of meaning with no religious structure at all.
And that's also a total lie. I know this because I personally have zero religious structure in my life. I consider the things I find fulfilling as being complementary to the tapestry of my life. I hold nothing in this world as being worthy of reverence or worship, and my life does have meaning and purpose because I have decided those things for myself. Primarily because I learned early on that a purpose freely chosen for oneself is infinitely more valuable than one dictated to you by someone else. Now, while how we bridge the divide with individuals who are in positions such as the one Ash finds himself in is incredibly easy to articulate, actually doing it proves a far more difficult matter. That's because, just like building a real bridge between 2 points, accomplishing that goal has always been a two-way street, requiring both sides to make a real effort to meet in the middle. And there are fewer greater roadblocks to that success than willful ignorance. As it usually turns out, when one lacks or outright ignores basic education in favor of maintaining a personally preferred narrative, the conclusions one comes to are, to put it mildly, profoundly flawed. This is why making sure that you've done your research so that you don't inadvertently misrepresent the subjects that you're engaging with is so important. Failing to do this, especially in a time when the information is readily available to you at a moment's notice, not only stymies any opportunity for legitimate discourse, but it also reinforces the notion that your motives were never to actually find common ground through an exchange of ideas, but only to preach intellectually dishonest and ignorant propaganda to a select group of individuals with the sole intent of deriving and selling personal validation. This childish tactic not only demonstrates a remarkable lack of self-awareness and ignorant arrogance, but it ultimately comes off to the audience in a way that I think Ash here unwittingly predicted for himself.
Oh, I shit my pants, baby!
Yes, you did, little boy. Yes, you did. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell for notifications. And be sure to leave a comment below. I love reading your responses, and those interactions help with the dreaded algorithm. Don't forget, June is LGBTQ+ Pride Month. A link to where you can support these important efforts is down in the description. And if you like what you saw here and would like to support this channel further, links to channel membership and to get yourself some official Bridge the Divide gear are down in the description. Once again, a massive thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support, and as always, be safe, be excellent to each other, and together we can bridge the divide.